Good morning, everyone. We working? Yeah. All right, I'll speak up. Make sure you can hear me. All right. This is our second week of our 6-week series on planning the Exodus. And I had a lot of information in that first week. I know I was trying to get some background in there. I was trying to make it approachable enough, but I knew that I was going to pack too much into that first one to really have a lot of time to talk about it. Because there's just some things you kind of have to get started. You have to start somewhere, and I started off out of the blocks as fast as I could. So if you didn't quite understand everything I talked about last week, I hope that it starts to make more sense now as we reference those things again moving forward. So in this second set here, the second day, we're going to talk about three different things. We're going to talk about a welcoming Pharaoh, a king's burial, and fearful choices. Fearful choices. In this first one, before we really get started, I want you to take a look at that question at the top of your sheet. It says, is the beginning of an experience more important than the end of one? When you start an experience, is it more important at the beginning, or is it more important at the end? I guess it depends on the experience, doesn't it? In a race, does it matter how you start? Kinda. I mean, if you fumble off the blocks, you're not going to go very far. But it's how you end that really matters. But in other things where you only get one shot, it's a one-time thing and it happens right now. I mean, when you do the shot put and you spin around, you got that ball up by your neck, and that launch, you only get the one. There's no end to that. It's just, did I launch at the right time, the right way? Or did I not? Did I give it everything I had? And it's so brief and so short, and so it depends on what you're doing, but I mean, really the idea is probably better stated, what step of a recipe is most important? They're all important. You've got it. Tom, you've got it. There's no way to possibly make a recipe work if you don't follow every step. That's just, we get so caught up in like little binary questions like, well, what about this and what about that? And when it comes right down to it, every step mattered. You can mix everything perfectly, but if you didn't turn the oven on, you can turn that oven on first. And if you skip the eggs, and when it comes right down to it at the end, if you pull it out too early, no one wants to eat it. And if you pull it out too late, no one can eat it. How many of you have ever had one of those char somethings in life? The first time I made hamburgers, my mom gave me a hard time and said those were the best hockey pucks she'd ever had. Oh, man. And that's just what it is. If you miss a step, if you don't follow through and do it the way it's supposed to happen, it messes things up. To review from last week, we've got a couple little details I want to make sure you're aware of. So we're looking at three different evidence, which just makes sense. We're going to look at the Egyptian records, we're going to look at the archaeological evidences, and we're going to look at what the Bible has to say about it. And if those three seem to match up, chances are we're on the right track. Because remember, we talked about not everybody even believes Exodus occurred. Some people think it's totally a fairy tale. But we want to look at evidences for ourselves and make up our own minds. And when somebody says to us, hey, that Exodus is a bunch of baloney, it never happened, you should have no problem looking them in the face and said, well, have you considered? And start rattling off the evidences, the things that they can't fight against. Well, that's just, it's because you don't know what you're talking about. You're repeating nonsense you heard. All right, so the idea is we want to make sure we know what's going on. And while there's missing details in each, in fact, I'm kind of sad. God decided that some parts of the Bible didn't need to be there. Not because the Bible doesn't need to include it. Just some of the story details aren't even included there in the Bible at all. We're going to get to a couple of those today, and I wish they were there. I wish I knew whether Abraham's father was a shepherd. That's the first one we talked about last week. I really wish I knew that. But either way, Egypt goes through a period of decline, and they have a split kingdom. And the kingdom, for the first time ever in its history, one portion, the northern portion, is ruled by foreign peoples. And I'm sure that got Egypt's goat. I'm sure the Pharaoh, the descendants of gods, who couldn't keep their own kingdom together got a little miffed about that. And that piece in the top, this Hyksos people, we don't know if Israel and his descendants were the people who were in charge and really running the whole show, or if they were just helping out. We don't know that. We weren't there, we don't know. We have to guess based on the things we saw. Some people say, well, it can't be them because they don't have any established culture showing in the area. And they're not wrong. Israel's only been called Israel for about 50 years. Baby cultures don't have culture. They're adding culture, they're adopting culture. When people moved here from Finland, they spoke Finnish. And they knew Finnish building styles. And they fished in the Finnish way. And they argued with their neighbors, the Swedes, because they did it their way. And they were a bunch of stubborn, pig-headed, and the Swedes thought the same thing back. And then the Poles, everyone made fun of the Poles. And then you got the Germans, right, with their harsh language. Everyone had their own way of doing things. And it wasn't until about 100 years in that Minnesota got its own culture. Now, the culture we take for granted for every day. But we didn't have a culture then, so people say, well, it can't be Israel because their culture isn't present. They didn't have a culture. It's one of those kinds of things. They were building a culture. They were collecting a culture. We talked about last time, that multiculturalism. They were adding things from different places, from Haran, from Ur. They're adding things from the Levant. They're adding things from Canaan. They're adding things now from Egypt. And when it's all said and done, they're going to build this stuff. We did see the food storage. We saw that they shared leadership, and that they were called Hyksos, which meant shepherd kings. Those are the things we talked about last time. They're going to help us frame this time. So let's get started. The patriarchs. God called Abram, and later changed his name to Abraham. And he was a faithful man. And his son Isaac was a blessed man, so much so that we talked about last time, one of the foreign kings, Abimelech, told him, you have to get out of here. We can't have you here. And he had his people bury the wells. He literally had them fill them with earth, so there was no water to drink in that area where he was hanging out. But he couldn't go to war with them because he knew he would lose or risk losing everything because he was that powerful, because he was a blessed man. And Abraham's grandson, Jacob, was a dedicated man. I do not know that I would have worked for 14 years for my lovely wife. And I certainly would have been upset if I had worked for 7 and gotten her sister. No offense to her sister, that wasn't the one I was looking at. And I would have been angry. Oh, I would have been angry. I don't know that I was that dedicated. I don't know that I would have been that dedicated to usurp my brother's blessings and all the things that Jacob does. But he was a dedicated man, and God honored him because he honored God. And his great-grandson, Joseph. Well, Joseph is the interesting one. He's the one we're going to focus on today. See, Joseph was so favored by Jacob that he was the one the Bible spelled out, getting the coat of many colors. Now, to me, it always seemed weird, like, why would he get a coat of many colors? Who cares about a coat of a bunch of colors on it? But if the people in the area, the shepherd kings, the most influential people in the area, had this coat, and we see this coat showed up previously when the Hyksos showed up to Egypt, when Abraham went down, that was the dress they wore. It's very likely that Abraham even wore this as a rich, affluent, shepherd-type person. And so when Jacob gives this to his son, he's basically saying, like, you guys are all great, all these other kids I got lined up. But this one gets my favor. This one gets the special treat. This one gets to look the part of a shepherd king. It blew my mind. I never understood that before. And I'm not saying that's what it is, but it would make sense. And he's the dreamer. Joseph is the dreamer who said his whole family would bow before him and he'd reign over them. And they laughed at him, and they mocked him, and in a way they kind of envied and feared him. And so they sold him as a slave. They were going to kill him, but God moved on Reuben's heart, and he said, no, we can't do that. We can't kill our own brother. What's God going to do to us if we do this? We will be, that's like Cain and Abel type stuff. We can't do that. They knew better. But God didn't say we couldn't sell him. Now, I don't know about you who have a sibling. There were a couple of days where I was ready to sell my sibling. But I wasn't going to kill him. The idea, though, is that he gets sold into slavery, and he gets picked up. And you can say, well, this is just a happenstance. This is one of those coincidences. He gets picked up by a guy named Potiphar, and he becomes the ruler over Potiphar's house. So Joseph is all the things his fathers were: faithful, obedient, dedicated, blessed. And he gets to be in charge of something. Joseph is from a Semitic tribe. They're from Shem's background. And the Egyptians were descendants of Ham. These are Noah's kids, right? They moved to different areas of the world, and so after the flood, they moved out into different things. And the Egyptians were descendants of Ham, so they looked different. Not a lot, but enough. They could tell. When you walked up, you say, oh, there's one of those guys. They're not the same as me. Oh, there's somebody else. They're not the same as me. And they could tell back and forth. But the Hyksos, whether it was Israel only or whether it was other people from Canaan that had come down and done these things, they looked similar. In fact, they probably were related, third, fourth cousins. So when Joseph goes down that way, the Egyptians were kind of used to some of them, and it seems like there were already merchants in Egypt. And so that makes sense why they would get this kind of reception from the Pharaoh for Joseph. And I think it was even more interesting. We frozen? What's going on here? Sometimes technology, I swear. Doesn't want to move on, huh? Did it freeze? Oh, that makes more sense. Technology issues. So, I'll just tell you what it is until I get it back up. Potiphar is described as an Egyptian. Now you might think, Dan, that's crazy. He's in Egypt. Of course he's Egyptian. But I told you, the Hyksos have been ruling for many, many years now. They're kind of in charge in a way. And when it says that Joseph went and sought Pharaoh, kind of after this whole thing with or not Pharaoh yet, but he goes and it talks about the Pharaoh and how he's in this area for the Pharaoh. He's in Egypt, and in Egypt he gets to be put in charge of Potiphar's house. Well, Potiphar was the captain of the guard, but he was Egyptian. Why would the Bible say he was Egyptian if he was in Egypt? It would make more sense to say he was not Egyptian or something like that. But the captain of the guard, the guy who was in charge of Pharaoh, was Egyptian. Why would you talk about a Pharaoh if the guy in charge of him was Egyptian? Why would you even mention that? That'd be like me saying, well, pastor's from Wisconsin. Why would I say that? Because he's not in Wisconsin. He's in Minnesota. It only makes sense because it's a contrast. And so the Potiphar is an Egyptian. There are Egyptians living in the area when the Hyksos are in charge. And one of them is very powerful, and he's probably hired by the Hyksos Pharaoh, whether that was somebody from Israel or somebody not. And they're probably saying this for a very particular reason. It only makes sense if somebody different was in charge than the person they talked about for this Egyptian kind of heritage. Beautiful. Joseph became a prisoner. I'm not going to retell the whole story. It was told recently. You guys have been doing a great job in Bible study in the morning. I don't need to tell that part. But the idea is this. He's a prophet. God tells him something, and he shares it with other people, and that's what a prophet does. And so this prophet nature of Joseph, he's got great things going for him. And we see in Genesis 45, but now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. He's talking to his brothers. For God sent me before you to preserve you. We talked last time about plans. God is a God of plans. Did God know that they were going to try and kill Joseph? I don't know. I think God would have found a way for Joseph into Egypt no matter what, because he had a plan for him. Not only did he have a plan for Joseph, he had a Pharaoh waiting to accept him. He had a place, a land available to take him in. He had a job that required doing that he orchestrated by his own hand. And everything was lining up perfectly for this to happen. So God sent him to preserve their life. Not that they deserved it, if you heard Trevor's message. Israel's family is a little messed up. But he still made a way because he made a promise to Abraham. And for these 2 years, there had been famine in the land. And Genesis 45 continued. And there were still 5 years coming. The prophecy was coming true. There's going to be a need. There's going to be a reason to move them out of Canaan, where they were not supposed to be at the time, and to give them an opportunity to do something great for God. And there was going to be no plowing or harvesting. There wasn't enough water. There was not enough rain. The desert area there would not work. There's areas in Egypt that they could be, but this area won't work. And it says again, God sent me before you. He repeats it. To preserve prosperity for you. Keep that in the back of your mind. Joseph is not just there to help them, but he's there to preserve posterity for you, to make sure that they're okay, and to give them a great deliverance. So in Genesis 46, it says, so it shall be when the Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? Pharaoh's going to want to know, what do you do for a living? We're not just going to take in deadbeats. We want somebody who's going to get something done. What can you do for us? And you're supposed to answer this. Your servant's occupation has been with livestock from our youth even till now. Both we and also our fathers. I never noticed this before in reading this, but it says fathers, not father, not Jacob, not Israel, not whatever you want to call their father, not my dad's job, my father's. This is a generational thing. We've always been shepherds. This is important to him. You tell Pharaoh this. This isn't the one. This is like going to a paint store, and you see the little corner of the building established 1927. Ooh. Reputation, longevity. This is great. This isn't established 2024. They know what they're doing. But here's the kicker. They're going to dwell in the land of Goshen. He tells them, you can go here into this land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination to the Egyptians. They hate shepherds. So what is there a lack of in Egypt, do you think? Shepherds. Do they have animals? Well, obviously. But do they have shepherds? Do they have big flocks? Everybody kind of owns their own. It's very interesting about Egyptian culture. Egyptian culture is very much like our culture. The bigger the cities, the bigger the culture, the more privatized and personal ownership everyone has, right? We own all this stuff. And so these are an abomination to the Egyptians. How dare somebody own all those animals by themselves? We get to each own our own. So why did Pharaoh give the best part of Egypt to the Hebrews when the Egyptians hate shepherds? Doesn't that seem strange to you too? Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me. Why would he do this? But there's a couple reasons for it, I think. So Jacob and his sons met with Pharaoh, and he asked them some of his questions, and he asked them specifically in Genesis. Is that not working too? Oh, no, it's working. This is a strange micro. It's a weird technology day. You are all welcome after this morning's service to go back there, lay hands on that board, and pray. I won't mind. But in Genesis 47, Pharaoh says, hey, can you take care of my herds too? It's a personal favor to Pharaoh. And it's going to help him and bless him himself. So why would he give him the fertile, watered area? Well, because he wants good herds. Take care of your own, sure, but then take care of mine too, right? Enrich me. And this might even suggest that the Pharaoh at this time in this area was not an Egyptian. Because if the Egyptians hated them, probably wouldn't have brought them in and said, okay, you can be here. And if it is an Egyptian Pharaoh, he's probably overlooking some of that. He's not as strict about some of the rules as maybe other Egyptian pharaohs might be. And so he's kind of lenient towards this kind of thing. And so he says, yeah, come on in because of your scarcity. We need this kind of work done. So then Joseph becomes the governor of Egypt, who protected and enriched the nation. Now, I don't know if you thought about this much, but Joseph doesn't just come in to help his own family. In fact, Joseph helps Egypt more than Egypt can help Egypt. In Genesis 47, it says, so now it was not you who sent me here, but God. He repeats the same idea. Joseph knows this in his heart. God did this. It's not even a question for him. And he made me father to Pharaoh. I had never noticed this before either. He made him father to Pharaoh. Now, I don't know what that means. This is one of those moments in the Bible where, like, what on earth are you talking about, Joseph? How are you the father to Pharaoh? And because the Egyptian records at this point are so poor, and because the Hyksos themselves do not keep these kinds of records, they're more worried about the records that are on their bank account than they are about the ones of their posterity and who's going to be in charge. They're not dynastic kings. No one tells us. But if I had somebody come in and help me out so much so that I called them my father, Tom, if you helped me out so much that I would call you my second dad, you'd be pretty important to me. How many of you have somebody in your life like that? Somebody you would call a relative, maybe not even a relative, but you would call them your relative because of how important they are in your life. That's crazy to me. And it's not my son. We don't know how old this person is, but it's very likely whoever the Hyksos leader is, this person who is a co-regent pharaoh with the Egyptian pharaoh, whoever that is probably very young, even younger than Joseph. That seems very interesting to me as well. And he makes him lord of all his house and a ruler over the land of Egypt. In fact, I would hazard to guess, the Bible doesn't tell us, but that whoever was in charge, the pharaoh of the northern kingdom, was so inadequate at doing their own job, other than maybe the one area that got them involved in the first place, that they had to lean on other better people to do it. And Joseph is that guy because he's blessed by God. Very interesting stuff here. And so Joseph deals with the famine. As is predicted in Genesis 47, the famine is going to come. The skinny cows and the fat cows, and Joseph's in charge. He knows what's going on. He knows what's going to happen. And God's given a kind of an idea in here. And so I'm not going to read it all to you because it's a long piece, but it's predicted there's not going to be any bread. So Joseph says, bring me some money, I'll sell you some bread. I don't think this happened immediately. I think this was a couple years in. I think it happened in other places, like in Canaan. That's why Jacob had to come down with his sons. I think they came down early, but about the third year, I think, the Egyptians started to feel the crunch. The Hyksos in northern Egypt started to feel the crunch. The neighboring areas by the Nile started to feel that crunch. And so he said, give me some of your money and I'll give you some of this bread. They're like, no problem. Take our money. We can't eat money. Give us the bread. And then when they ran out of money after a year, the Bible says, they come and they says, well, we have no money. We're hungry, but we have no money. Give me your livestock. Now, it's not for him personally. It's for Pharaoh. But he says, give me your livestock. I'm in charge. I'm helping out Pharaoh. Give me your livestock. I'll enrich him. And so they did. They brought their flocks and their herds and their donkeys. And after a year, the livestock was all owned by Pharaoh through Joseph. And then they run out. There's no more animals to give away. There's no more money to give away. And so now give us the land and the people to work it. And so all the land becomes Pharaoh's. This is all privately owned. Egyptians, real Egyptians, not the Hyksos, not the rulers, not the ruling class, the Egypt are giving away they have for bread because it's that bad. And now Pharaoh owns the land and the workers. He owns the livestock and he's got all their money. Only the priests didn't have this option. The priests got to keep their own land because they had enough food coming in because the Pharaoh said, no, we got to maintain these priests. They're important. We'll talk about them another day. But they're there. I want you to be aware of them. And so Pharaoh gives them this land because they have their own lands. They have their own food then. But they come again hungry. They're out of land to sell off. They're out of money. They're out of livestock. And they have one thing they have left. And it's themselves, like their indentured servitude. They like, well, you already own us. We don't have nothing to give you. We still need this food. And Pharaoh says, well, I need people to sow the land. I need farmers. So I'll let you work the land, and I'll let you keep what you grow, but I get 1/5. Joseph cuts the deal for them. 20% tax. Joseph got their money, he got their animals, he got their land, he got their work, and a 20% tax out of them. They went from private, independently wealthy people to serfs in 5 years. And Pharaoh, whoever that was at the time, owned it all. You want to talk about the fall of a nation? That's fast. That's powerful. But the funny thing is, I have this hunch. You see, Joseph began ruling around 30 years old, and he died at 110, which gives him 80 years to be in charge. And that's almost the whole time the Hyksos were in charge. They're only in charge for a little over 100 years. So the majority of the time the Hyksos were in charge in Egypt, Joseph was the guy in charge himself. And when he comes into power, he doesn't really have much power, but he builds this power. He gets financially wealthy himself through this process. And God's blessing is upon him, and he builds up this wealth of this nation, Egypt, and that's not really what God wants to do. You see, Jacob and his sons were given land and protection by the Pharaoh. If I was going to cut a deal and avoid the taxes and maybe slip a little bread, am I going to give it to the Egyptians or my family? It's family. Not only did they come out of Canaan in a severe famine, but they come into a land of Egypt, and I think they were exempted from all of it. They had their own flocks. They had their own herds. They had no real money to speak of, but they had some, probably from trading. But the land was given to them by Pharaoh, which means it was protected by Pharaoh like the priests. And the food was given to them by Joseph because he was generous, and he himself was extremely wealthy. He's the second in command. Imagine what would have happened if Joseph had been like an Ahab or even a Solomon, so concerned about what he wanted to do. But Joseph had the right attitude. God sent me. I'm doing this on his behalf. And he took care of his whole family. Now we get to the king's burial. So pharaohs are mummified. You guys knew that. You guys may have seen those pictures. Anybody ever seen one in real life? Ever been to a museum where they had a mummy behind glass? Pretty cool, Shawnee? Something I want to do in my lifetime just to see it. I think it'd be interesting to see. I know the process reasonably. It takes about 40 days to do this whole process, and 75 you do the ceremonies and everything go with it, but it's a long process to embalm somebody. It's not like today where they drain them and pump them full of fluid and then you're ready for the funeral the next day kind of thing. But it's a much more rigorous process back in the day. And now everybody could afford it. It was very expensive. They had special tools. They had trained professionals who did this kind of thing. And obviously pharaohs get this because they ascend to godhood, and of course they have to be preserved. But nobility got it too, and some of the officials, priests and things. It's very uncommon for poor people to have this. Very uncommon. And there's an interesting pattern to some of these kinds of things that I see. Pharaohs were the representatives of Horus or the gods. Barb, who are you a representative of? Whose spirit lives in you? Jesus. Yeah, exactly. We're representatives. You're on par with the pharaohs. You're a representative of God, just like they were. And they were political leaders. They influenced the world. See, I don't know if you knew this, but if you follow after Jesus, you get to influence the world. And they're the embodiment, the body for divinity. Now, this might sound crazy to some of you, but Jesus wants to fill you with his spirit. And Don, if he does, you are the embodiment of God. You are his hands and feet here on earth. You are on par with the pharaohs. Now, were the pharaohs really empowered by God? Well, we're going to find out in a couple lessons. Probably not. But you can be in real life. There's this spiritual parallel, this pattern of things. And when you die, the pharaohs were supposed to ascend into divinity beyond their deaths. Glorious resurrection, new bodies. Does that mean that Joseph and Abram and Moses just copied the Egyptians? Or did the Egyptians copy something better? Something truer? Something God designed with his plans from the beginning? Interesting thought. But that's how it worked for them. And so you see, Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. Jacob gets a royal burial. Now, he had to make promises. Jacob had to go back. There was a space where he had already buried his wife Leah. There was a space where his fathers were entombed. And I have a hunch that if you could find that space, you would find some mummies in it. Because they brought them back. When they traveled in the wilderness, somebody was in charge of old Jacob's bones in his mummified body. It'd be really weird in the nation of Israel to go back and find mummies. But I bet you they're there. I'm waiting for the day archaeology is like, hey, we found this cave and there's some mummies in it. Weird, right? No. No, it's not. It's exactly what I expect at this point. And then he's dead. But then Joseph knows he's going to die, and he says, God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land. He will fulfill his promise. He said he was going to do it. He's going to do it, which he swore to Abraham. He's the one who walked through between the carcasses. He's the one who presented himself with fire and sealed the covenant. He's going to do it. You don't have to lose faith. Because I think at this point, they're getting nervous. Well, Joseph's always been in charge. He's been in charge forever. He's the guy. He's the man. He's like, he might be second in command, but he's the one calling all the shots anyway. He's the one getting the job done. He's the one who enriched everyone and blessed us and kept us. And so when he dies, Joseph then took an oath from the children of Israel saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry my bones up out of here. You got to take care of me. I'm not going to be buried here in Egypt. I want to be taken from here as well. So Joseph died at 110, and they embalmed him as well. Now it's interesting, it says that Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, Israel. He was in charge of the guys doing the job. And when he died, he was so important, they're like, we have to do this to him too. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to where Joseph was in Egypt and how it worked out. If you really want to see that, there's a video link at the end, and you can go take a peek and see if you believe it or if that seems too far-fetched for you. But there's some stuff there. It's interesting. Very interesting, in fact, the archaeological evidence they found in this house with the 12 pillars. So many things line up. It's very interesting. I'm not saying that's what it is, and nobody can prove that it is because his name isn't written down, Joseph's house. It doesn't say that. And if some people, if it isn't black and white stamped on their forehead, they won't believe it. That's just how they are. But it's very interesting that there are 12 tombs, and one is special, and it's got a pyramid, which made Pharaoh-like, and there's these pillars. It's crazy. But it seems like Joseph really was there, he really was in charge, and that the number 12 really mattered in this regard. So the Hyksos controlled the Delta for about 100 years. In Exodus 1, after Joseph had died, it said that they were fruitful, and they increased abundantly. They were not in servitude. They were not being lessened. They had not had their livestock or their land or their money taken. They just grew in strength and number. And they were filled. The land of Egypt was filled with these people. They were everywhere. They were everywhere. But there's a new king who comes, who knows not Joseph or these people. We'll talk more about these kings next week, because there's too much detail to get into today, but there is a new king who comes, and he says, Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal wisely with them. Now, how many of you know what they did to deal wisely with them? They said, hey, you should be in charge again. No. They said, hey, we're going to take it easy on you. No, we're going to make you work hard. And the harder they made them work, the worse it got. See, Exodus gives numbers about 2 centuries after this that are so enormous that we would be like, that's not even possible. How did 70 people in Jacob's house, how did that 70 people came down, plus the ones that Joseph had collected for himself, how did 70 people, plus their workers and servants and things, turn into 2 million? Well, it's very likely when Jacob came down, he came down with 10,000 people because of all the people who had worked for them. And to haul the stuff that Joseph had sent them and to take care of it, it was a lot of people. But even then, how did 10,000 become 2 million? Possibly higher. We don't know. Except that clearly the Bible says they were blessed. And the Egyptians have reacted to them. This is one of the strongest proofs for me, is that the Egyptians react strongly to this people. They're like, we've got to get them out of here. We have to. And this new king takes on this new initiative, and he goes and he fights them. Says, we got to get rid of these guys. We got to get their leader out of here. Manetho says that they sported hundreds of thousands of footmen. How do you have 100,000 plus, 200,000, 300,000 footmen, soldiers, ready for battle if you don't have millions? That's a lot of people. I don't think we have that many. Hundreds of thousands of troops on the ground, boots on the ground? I don't think so. We don't need them now in modern warfare. It's not how it works. But when you guys talk about those kind of things, like the million-man army of China, right? Like that's a thing because they have so many people, 1 billion people, they can field a million-man army. And here, they're saying they have hundreds of thousands of troops on the ground. And the native pharaoh only really has about 3 million people anyway. So this new kingdom period occurs probably approximately 1550 BC. And it starts with the 18th dynasty, and it's a united Egypt controlled by the Thutmosid pharaohs. There's a lot of Thutmose in there. Thutmose the first and the second and the third. We'll talk about them next week. But the idea is they're there, and they transition into the 19th dynasty, Ramesseid period, which is probably the one you're familiar with from school. How many of you learned a little bit about Egypt back in school back in the day, somewhere? Read some books, had some videos. Yeah, these are the people you probably are more familiar with. These are the people like King Tut, right? How many of you, that rings a bell? King Tut, right? Nefertiti, right? The famous Egyptian queen with the bust that they have. And Ramses the Great, or the second, right? You guys have heard some of these kinds of things, these names, right? Maybe you've heard him by his other name, Ozymandias. Like, there are things out there. These are the famous Egyptians we talk about. They come right after this period. And this is the time, this 18th and 19th century, for sure they know this is when the Exodus occurred. Like, anyone who believes an Exodus occurred says it occurred during these two dynasties. I personally think it's the 18th, and we're going to look at some information for that. But the idea is that there's some fearful choices made. So we know Israel has grown. They're beautiful. They're big. They're multiplying. And Egypt's not happy about it. And this new king over Egypt, although this is his son, the first new king actually died trying to fight the Hyksos. His son, Kamos, is the one who does this. And he has this Carnarvon tablet, this big stone tablet. It's like big as this. It's just a big arch of stone. I'll show you in a second. And he writes about this, about them getting too powerful. And they need to be overthrown. We need to get rid of them now while we have a chance to get rid of them, he says. They're too much otherwise. And last week we talked about thoughts and plans and devices and counsels. Now, Liam, do you trust Trevor's thoughts, plans, devices, and counsels? Of course you do. Your parents? Yeah. Random guy on the street? Probably not. Politicians? Exactly. That's the right answer. I don't know about that. But God's? Yeah, because God's are the sure ones. We talked about that. God declared these are the sure ones. These things actually happen. This here demonstrates, he writes down the plans for Egypt. Kamos says, I'm going to take care of these Hyksos people. I'm going to get rid of them. I've got plans. We're going to reunite the kingdom. I'm going to take everything they've gotten. And you know it looks juicy because God has blessed it. God literally planted them by the waters, like we might read in Psalms, and they're there feeding their flocks and raising families and growing and multiplying unhindered for 100 years plus. And this new king over Egypt, this new king over Egypt, is exactly what's in that statue there, that stone. And Kamos's advisors protest against a nationalistic pharaoh. They said, we don't need to, we have Egypt. Egypt is here in the upper Egypt, in the beautiful kingdom, the higher elevation one. They're just food down there. All the money and the power and the wealth and the interest are up here. This is where all the good stuff is. We don't need to do that. And Pharaoh, kind of like Solomon's son, says, oh, no. Oh, I got plans. I've got plans. And he doesn't listen to his counselors. They're blessed under the trade. All this is it's enriching their kingdom. The king of Egypt in the southern portion is getting wealthier and wealthier by the day. And he thinks, this is my money. This is my land. These are my people. I own this. Now I'm going to rule it as well. I'm not going to have secondary advisors. I'm not going to have these people who are kind of sort of in charge. Dr. Manfred Beitek, the chief excavator of Avaris, the capital city of this Hyksos, states, we have no evidence that these people who came here to rule us ever left. Manetho said they left, and then they left some other time after. Evidence says that's not what happened. They did not leave. They're still here. And they were in service while they were there. He says that they were in service to the new overlords in various capacities. And it's found throughout all of Egypt. And the uninterrupted production of their pottery style, this is the one that archaeologists they'll hang their hat on this one. The pottery hasn't changed, the group hasn't changed. They'll hang their hat on this all day long. If the pottery remains the same, it is the same group. You only learn to make a pot so many ways. And that style is very instinctive and indicative of the group that it belongs to. And so he says, we're going to hang our hat on this. This is the group. It never changes. There's not an Egyptian style that takes over. There's not some other style that comes into favor. That doesn't transition to a different style. It's the same style over and over and over again. This is like telling a workman based off of his tells. Oh, take a look at the way this is done. I can tell. Craig built this. And I would hazard a guess that if people knew Craig well enough, they could tell right away if he had built something or not. There are probably parts of this building, Tom, that are like, no, Tom did that part, I can tell. If I did it, you'd definitely know, because you didn't redo it. It's one of those things you can kind of tell. You have a tell. Carrie Merrick's bread, right? How many of you had a piece of her bread before? You know. I could blind taste test you right now, I bet. Slice it up. Oh, that's Carrie's. You can tell. It's not even a question. You just know it's got this thing. And so this is the same kind of idea. And so they have this. And there's Canaanite cults, is what they describe it as. Well, that might actually be Baal worship, which some of the people, including Jacob's own wife, was involved in. Right? The little idols. You remember that? She'd hide them in the tent, try to be all sneaky. Some of that did come with them because they were a multicultural people. But some of those cults and things don't change. They're not Egyptian worship at this point. They know they're different or foreign. And so there's evidence that there was ever an expulsion of this Hyksos people. Just like the Bible kind of hints at, right? They set taskmasters over them. And they built supply cities of Pithom and Ramses, the city of Ra, right? The sun god. And the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied or grew. I wish I had more time to talk about these two. In fact, I think somebody should do a Bible study on these two. Not because there's a lot to say about them, but what ladies? See, Pharaoh wasn't content with just work. He pushed them harder and they got bigger. He made them work more and they got tougher. And it was scaring him. Because usually this works. If I work you to the bone, you should be falling apart. And they weren't. God blessed them in everything they did. And so he gets nervous. He says, we're going to kill them. And so he goes and talks to these two midwives, the ladies who are birthing children constantly. And he says, when you do the duties and you see them on the birth stool, if it's a son, you've got to kill it. Kill that baby boy. No more baby boys. We'll leave the girls. Maybe we can marry them, whatever, put them to work as servants. But those boys have to go because that's what's scary. And these two ladies feared God more than Pharaoh. And they did not do as he commanded. They followed after God's plan that life matters, and we're not going to do this. And they saved the male children alive. Pharaoh had made plans, and those plans didn't work, so he made new plans. He says, I'm going to kill the kids. I don't know about you. If somebody said, I'm going to burn down your house, I might be a little worried. I might take some precautions. I might do some things, or I'm going to rob your house. Okay, I got precautions in hand. But you say you're going to kill my kids? Everything takes a different tact. This isn't the same anymore. I could lose my house. It's not the end of the world. You don't get to take my kids from me, though. And when he made plans for the death of children, I can't imagine God's doing anything up in heaven but saying, pump the brakes, kid. You better watch what you're doing. I think this is this is not God's plan. This is the Pharaoh's plan. Pharaoh made plans. Remember the former things of old. I promise you there were stories of Cain and Abel from going back, even in Egypt. They might have called them a different name, but they were there. And there were times before pre-flood where people were doing evil things, and those stories still hang on. They knew better. Remember those former things of old. There's no other God. And God says, he frustrates the devices of the crafty. Pharaoh said, I'm going to put you to work. I'm going to make you a slave. I'm going to make you break those bricks. It's going to be twice as hard. And God says, no, your plans aren't going to come to fruition. You're not going to dampen their spirit. You're not going to lower their population. You're not going to... And Pharaoh says, watch me. I will do what I want. And God says, I know the thoughts that I think towards you, to give you a future and a hope. Is Pharaoh going to be successful and kill some babies? Yeah, sadly he is. But the can of worms he opens, we're going to see next week, the start of, would not envy that position. The new Pharaoh wrote a waging war on the Hyksos. He wrote it out on the stones. He could see everybody could see his plans. Archaeology shows that he won. He defeated them, conquered them, and enslaved them, and that they served him. And the Bible says that he feared their numbers, and he was going to kill all their baby boys. But God has other plans. If you want to do some more research, I've got some new links there for you, all brand new. So if you want ones from last time, you did some deep digging, you can see those. There's some interesting stuff in there, particularly Joseph's tomb in Egypt I liked. You can always check all this stuff out on the website. Thank you for your wonderful attendance and attention, and I hope you guys are ready for worship at 11. Go enjoy your rest and greet one another. Love you guys.